In any life, we have highs and lows, light and dark, wins and losses. What happens when we encounter that moment in time when what happens next could change everything? Join us as we step into another person's inspirational moment and see how we can connect their experience to ours. This is Greg Stevens, and you're listening to A Shot of Inspiration. Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Stevens, and welcome to another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. I'm here with Eric Cloward today. And Eric is a coach in Amsterdam. He used to live in the States. He was actually a CTO for a startup organization several years ago, and then made a shift recently in the last couple of years over to coaching. And I talked with Eric a couple months ago. It's been a while since it took some time to get this interview going because my schedule's been a little crazy and to cancel on him once. So sorry about that, Eric, but glad to
Yeah, no
have you
worries.
here today. And so everyone, this is Eric Cloward. Eric, thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's go back. Let's talk about you were in the States, a CTO working for a startup company, and then you made a shift over to coaching. Walk us through a little about your background and what led you to the shift that you've created in your life and also the move to Amsterdam. I think that's really amazing. I think the best education you can have is actually traveling and living different places. So I'm envious of what you're doing right now. That's really great.
Yeah, I've been in tech for 25 years. Originally started out as just a web designer. So I taught myself how to make web pages back in the day. And this was back around late 1990s. And from that point on, just kept getting deeper and deeper into building websites. Yeah, and took some development classes and found that I was really good at it. I've always been good at mathematics and geometry, which is basically logic with shapes. And then I'm also a musician, which is a lot of abstract thinking. And so I've found throughout my career that usually the best developers that I've worked with, the most creative ones anyway, usually are good at algebra, geometry, and music. And so I fell into it at the right time, right place. And it worked well for me for quite some time. I ended up becoming a CTO for a startup in Portland. I'd been there as a senior developer, left for a while, and then came back and was there for another 5 years, and then reached a point where due to some internal conflicts with certain people, I talked with the CEO and was just like, hey, there's some people in here who are damaging our organization and they really need to leave because I've had several people quit on my team simply because of this one person. And we had been through thick and thin. So I was really disappointed when he was like, I'll take that into consideration. And if somebody else leaves because of her, then we'll look into it. And I ended up having so much more work on my plate because my guys kept quitting because of this person. So I reached a point where I was unhappy and I moved on from there and ended up working, just doing some consulting work, contract work for a while, and ended up working for a much, much smaller company. There were only 5 or 6 of us in the company and did development there for a number of years. And then I got laid off a little over a year ago from there. So again, small company, so strings were tight. But also within the last 2 years, just a lot of things happened. My primary relationship of 10 years had ended, which was tough. That was a really heart-wrenching one. And also my kids were grown up and moved out. So I was living in a giant 6-bedroom house in Portland and was like, okay, I don't need this. I don't need this stuff. And this last year, I pretty much cleared out everything, gave away everything, sold everything, and I have a few bins and a bicycle and some music equipment in my brother's place in Portland. And then I just moved over here. I lived in Europe when I was younger. I used to be Mormon and I went on a mission to Austria and thought about going to the German speaking countries, but there was something that was just calling me to come to Amsterdam. And I'm still not sure why I'm here, to be honest. It's just one of those things where it just felt like the right place to be. The switch over to coaching is an organic growth of my podcast. So I have a podcast called the Stoic Coffee Break, which I started back in 2018. So, like I said, I'm not sure why I'm here in Amsterdam or what exactly I'm supposed to accomplish here, but it just felt like where I needed to be. I'm still figuring things out. I finally got an apartment, which is a challenge here. The housing market is really tight. I put offers on 5 different apartments, and this one's further out than I want, but it's a good apartment. It's a good price. It's in a very peaceful area. It's 2 minute walk from a metro stop, so I can get into town easy enough. So it'll be fine. And it's month to month. So if something better comes along, then I can move into that. But now I at least have a place to get settled. Right now I'm staying in an extended stay hotel, which is has actually been a lot of fun. It's in a good part of Amsterdam, but it's expensive. So the apartment will be basically half the cost of living here. So it'll work out pretty nice.
Let me ask you, how liberating was it to get rid of things like you were talking about?
Yeah, I got rid of a tremendous amount of stuff. I lived in that house since 2011, so 2011 till basically 2024, at the
Mhm.
beginning of 2024. Yeah, I gave away a baby grand piano to my neighbor. So yeah, she had a son who he was about 7 or 8 and a bit of a prodigy as far as that goes. And they came over and we talked for about 20 minutes and he sat down and he played the whole time. Just was just so into it. And I'm like, is he this way all the time? She's like, yeah. He comes home from school and he sits down and he plays for about 2 to 3 hours. He loves playing piano. And he was just so excited. And our piano isn't that great. I put it out on our neighborhood buy nothing giveaway Facebook group. And I picked it up in 2011 for $425.
Wow.
So yeah, it was, I got it on a deal. So I didn't feel like it was worth it for me to try and sell it. I really just didn't care at that point. It was 100 years old, or it'll be 100 years old next year. So it's a very old piano,
Yeah.
but it's in pretty good shape. And yeah, so I had a baby grand piano for about 10 years and 12 years and really liked that. So getting rid of everything felt like a, a giant relief, honestly,
Yeah.
just not being tethered to all of that stuff and coming over here and starting over. And I've been accumulating things. I've been here since end of January. It happened. So I have a few bins of stuff tucked away. But once I get settled here, I'm actually buying most of the furniture because the people who are leaving the apartment, they bought a caravan and they're going to be traveling around Europe with their kid for the foreseeable future. So they're just like, hey, do you just want to buy all of our stuff? Like 12, 1,300 euros, and we'll just give you everything. And I was like, okay. Yeah, that means I don't have to buy it. So it saves me probably about $5,000
Right.
not having to buy all my stuff. And it's okay. If there's stuff I don't like, I'll give it away. You know,
Right.
for me, I look at stuff as being very utilitarian and I'm not too sentimental about things. There are some things that I do care for and that I like, but again, it's just stuff and it's always replaceable.
Did you
And
find at
it's
first it was difficult to do that though? At the very beginning, then it got easier?
not really. I
Okay.
think that over the last I've never really been too sentimental about stuff, but because I've really worked hard to embody Stoic philosophy, and one of their things is material things aren't either good or bad. They're just there for you to practice virtue, meaning you can be wealthy and still be a great person. You can be poor and still be a great person. It doesn't matter what your material possessions are or aren't.
Yeah.
And if your material possessions are things that cause you to have less virtue, to be practice wisdom, courage, justice, and moderation, meaning self-discipline, then you probably should reevaluate those and get rid of them if you're too attached to things. In Buddhism, we see that as well, that people's unhappiness comes from their attachment to things. And so for me, I've over the years just developed more of an attitude of a utilitarian thing. I'm going to get the best tool that I can get for the thing that I'm trying to do. And that's really what it comes down to. So everything I buy now is I'm very deliberate about it. When I go out and buy a jacket, I don't just go, oh, I'm going to go shopping. I want to buy something. It's, I need a jacket and I need it like this. Like I just bought this the other day because I needed something that was lightweight, very breathable because I don't have a car here. So I ride my bike everywhere. And so I need stuff that's breathable while I'm riding along. Otherwise I get too sweaty and then I'm just dripping with sweat wherever I go. So just making sure that I'm very thoughtful about the things that I buy.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's been very nice to start over. And I got rid of so much stuff. And I got rid of a lot of stuff before I sold the house because I had to get it all cleaned up for the showings and stuff like that. How's this for crazy? I got rid of a large garbage sack full of shoes, probably about 25 pairs of shoes, and another bag that was just full of hats because I have no hair. So I'm always having all kinds of different hats. I had all these great
Every-
classical fedoras and stuff like that. And then probably at least a dozen other bags of clothes and stuff that I hadn't worn for forever. And so it was really good to just get rid of all of those things. And there were some things I gave away, like I had a kilt that I really liked, but there's one that I like that's better. And so I gave
Right.
that kilt to my younger brother. And I was like, he's a little bit taller than me and it's a longer kilt. And I was like, hey, I think you like this one. And he's like, yeah, this is great. Love this thing. And I'm like, actually, I have the smaller version of that. So I sent that for his wife. I don't know if she ever wears it or not, but I was just like, you guys can have it, do what you want with it. But I just found that it isn't really that hard for me to do that. It's just more of making sure that I have the right things that I want to make things comfortable, but that are also tools that are also very durable. I don't like buying cheap stuff that's going to break over and get rid of it in a short amount of time.
Right.
Like I have Bose speakers. I have these little
Yeah.
mini speakers that sync up and they sound absolutely phenomenal. And I know that they're probably going to last for 10 years at least. And so I brought those with me because I'm an audiophile and so I love listening to music that way.
Right.
So I don't waste time on just buying something cheap and hope that it gets by,
Yeah.
but making sure that the things that I have, while they may be a little more expensive, I know they're going to last much, much longer and they're going to
Right.
have the quality that I want.
Right. Let me ask you, your podcast, you talk about the Stoic philosophy. How did you get into that? What led you to that? You said you had been with the Mormon church, and I guess you did your mission in Germany, was it? And
Austria. Yeah.
Austria. Okay. What kind of led you from that place to the Stoic philosophy and running a podcast around all of that?
So my family goes back in the Mormon church till almost the beginning. So there was I think it was Stanley Polson Cloward or can't remember his exact name, but like a great grandfather. He was a shoemaker. He came into the valley with Brigham Young. He was one of the original 144. He had
Wow.
two wives. It goes that far back.
Mhm.
But throughout my life, I never felt like it was the right thing for me. So there's so much external pressure. And Stoicism is the exact opposite of that, where if you are living virtuously, if you are practicing living with integrity, it doesn't matter what anybody else says or thinks. You live the best life that you think you can live and don't care what anybody else thinks about it. Listen to other people because if they're telling you something like, hey, you're being a complete jerk, okay, listen to them. And then you need to use your wisdom to try and decide, are they just upset about something and they're trying to manipulate you? Do they have a real point? Marcus Aurelius talks about that. If any man can show me where I'm wrong, then I will change because the truth never hurt anyone. But living in ignorance can be incredibly painful and dangerous. And
Now,
so it's for me, Stoicism, because it's all about controlling what you can and not worrying about the things you can't. I can't control the opinions of other people. I can't control anything external to me, but I can control my choices, my actions, my thoughts, the things that I do, and the way that I treat other people. And yeah, so for me, I just found that Stoicism was just a much more centered way of living. And
and
I'm
where
just
did
much
did
happier doing that.
Stoicism begin with Marcus Aurelius, or was it something he took on before the origination of that philosophy? Where's that from? Because I've read a lot of things from Marcus Aurelius, and that's where it seemed to start for me. You probably know a lot more. I know, I'm sure you know a lot more
Yeah.
about it than I do. So where did it start?
Yeah, I'm actually writing a book for Simon and Schuster right now about Stoicism. So they contacted me about 3 months ago. I've got half of it done and working on the other half right now.
Okay.
And so I've really dug into the history quite a bit. And what happened was is that there was this merchant named Zeno of Citium, and he was very wealthy, and he was on a ship taking his wares across the ocean or across the over in Greece, and got in a shipwreck, lost everything, ended up in Athens, and was trying to figure out what to do next. And so one of the things he did while passing time was he went to the bookstore that they had there and he found Xenophon's biographies. And in that, he read about Socrates. And he was so taken with this description of Socrates. And that's the kind of person I want to be. I want that kind of wisdom and knowledge that Socrates has. And so he asked the booksellers, like, where can I find somebody to teach me how to be this kind of person? And right then, Crates, who was a cynic, the most famous cynic in Athens at the time, happened to be walking by right at that time. And bookseller said, there's your man. So he went to Crates and basically was like, I want to learn to become a philosopher. I want to understand these things. And the Cynics were very ascetic, meaning they lived in basically in poverty. They were rabble rousers in the way of they felt like a lot of human conventions were people worried too much about outer appearances of things. And so they would almost cause a stir just to make people feel uncomfortable, showing that oftentimes social conventions of the way that things should be are rather silly. We worry too much about what other people think and all of these type of things. And so Zeno learned a lot about how to be less worried about what other people think, because oftentimes he was. But through that and his studying of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and a lot of the other philosophers of the time, he developed his own set, which was based upon a lot of the Platonic and Aristotelian philosophical ideas, like the four main virtues, which are courage, wisdom, justice, and moderation. Moderation meaning self-discipline, justice, how you treat other people, not just about laws, but the way that you interact with the outside world. Courage, obviously needed to have any type of growth in your life. And wisdom is practical application of knowledge. Right. And in order to become courageous, you have to know how to be, and they're all self-reinforcing, which is what I love about that. In order to get wisdom, you have to have the courage to go out and experience things. And that's where you get wisdom from. In order to be courageous, you have to use some brains with it. You can't just rush out and do whatever you want. So you have to be wise with the way you practice your courage. You need courage and wisdom to practice justice and how you treat other people. And to wrap it all together, you need that self-discipline to be able to do all of those things. And so I found that neat little package is just really a powerful thing of how to live a very virtuous life. So after Zeno came up with a lot of these ideas, he started teaching them on the Stoiopolkia, which is this porch on the colonnade in Athens. And it literally means the painted porch. And so he would just get up there and he would just teach. He would say, this is what I'm learning. This is what I've come up with. And these are my thoughts about how to live a happy and virtuous life. And so he taught that. And that was the beginning of Stoicism. It hit its zenith about the time of Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus. They're the most known, mostly because by that point, so almost 600 years later, by that point, the philosophy had gone through many iterations, had been added to, had been refined. And by the time we reached that point, it's a very fully formed philosophy. And the other reason why is because we have most of their writings, or we have a good number of them. So Epictetus, we have his teachings, which were written down by one of his students. Seneca was a prolific writer. He wrote lots of plays. He wrote dozens of essays. He wrote letters to his nephew Lucilius, which are also out there for us to read. And then Marcus Aurelius is obviously his meditations. And so Marcus Aurelius was the last big Stoic that happened. So it was Epictetus and then Seneca and then Marcus Aurelius. And Marcus Aurelius even mentions Epictetus as somebody that he looked up to. And this is one of the people that I follow. Epictetus was also an incredible teacher. He was very acerbic. He was very dry with his stuff. And very much like Socrates, he would just ask lots and lots of questions. He would pose questions and then answer them, and just really had a very good way of cutting to the quick on things. Seneca was a little more flowery, a little more poetic, some stronger prose. And Marcus Aurelius, obviously, as an emperor, was very well educated. So that's really where that whole history comes from. And that's the very shortened version of it. But yeah.
That's awesome. And how did Simon and Schuster find you from your podcast? And that's awesome. That's great. And so when do you expect the book to be out?
Next fall. So it's on a pretty tight deadline. So
do you have a name for it?
Yeah, it's just called Stoicism 101. It's by an imprint that they own called Adams Printing. And I think Adams Printing, I'm not sure, but it's Adams. And they have Philosophy 101, they have Ethics 101. And so they contact me about writing Stoicism 101 because my podcast usually is just short segments that are about 10 to 15 minutes long. I sit down and I usually write them out. So I wrote out my whole podcast because I wanted to make sure that it sounded the way that I wanted to. But then I also found in writing like that, it really challenged me to dig a bit deeper and to really come up with something really good for my audience. And so it's been hard for me to step away from that format of writing the essay and then reading it. And I've I'm working a bit on that. I'm trying to reach a point because I do know this thing so well because I've been doing the podcast for 6.5 years.
Mm.
I've been studying Stoicism for 8 years. The way I fell into that was I was listening to Tim Ferriss's podcast, and he mentioned this book called The Guide to the Good Life, The Art of Stoic Joy, written by William Irvine. And William Irvine is a philosophy professor. And Tim was like, this book changed my life. And so that caught my attention. And the second, Stoic Joy, I was like, wait, what does Stoic Joy mean? That doesn't make sense to me from what I know. And I didn't know Stoicism was a philosophy or that's what a Stoic was. I just knew the more common term of somebody's very stoic, very
Right.
unemotional. And so bought the book, read it, and was like, okay, there's some interesting things in there, but I think I should have gotten more out of that. So then I got the audiobook and I would listen to it to and from work. And at 20 minutes each way, I kept having these lightning epiphanies, just the light bulbs going off. And I was just like, oh man, that explains why I get so angry about things. Okay. Wow, I never really thought of this. And it was like Neo in the Matrix when he sees the world as it really is and what's really going on behind the scenes. That's what Stoicism was for me. When people get angry about things, I would understand why they were angry about things. I could look below the surface. They might say they're angry about this, but I could look a little bit deeper and go, that's what they're upset about. But what's causing that anger is they're trying to control something in this situation. And so they're feeling some kind of fear. They're trying to control this situation somehow. So they're lashing out in this way and being able to dig a little bit deeper than what was
Yeah.
on the surface and being able to do that for myself has been incredibly helpful because I used to have a much shorter temper about things. And now when things go wrong, I'm just much more able to roll with it. I just accept that this is what life is. And me getting upset about this thing that happened probably is going to make it worse.
Right.
So the more I can just accept what life gives to me and try to love everything that life gives to me, which is one of the things that the Stoics talk about, this idea of amor fati, meaning love your fate. And what that means is you don't just accept what life gives to you, but you learn to love everything that life gives to you. Because first and foremost, just logically, you're going to get it whether you like it or not. This is what's coming your way. So you can hate it, which the universe just goes, okay. Or you can learn to love it, and the universe goes, all right.
It's interesting. I had my breakthrough around what you're talking about back in 95, 96, when I took a class called the Landmark Forum and had breakthroughs around that. And as you're speaking right now, a book keeps popping in my head, Living Untethered with Michael Singer, and the things that we get attached to, even emotion. He said it's like leaves on a tree. Normally you walk by, you see a tree, you don't think about it, but then all of a sudden you want to focus on one leaf and why it shouldn't be the way it is. And then that upsets you the entire day when you start to look at all the things. Oh, I'm going to grab that. I'm going to grab that and be upset about it. And then you're plugged in by your own unawareness about what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, the two biggest things that Stoicism, at least in the beginning, that really drew me in and were incredibly helpful was understanding that what I could control and what I couldn't. And
Mm-hmm.
that's called the dichotomy of control. And that is that I can control the way that I think about things. I can control the choices I make and the actions I take. And
Right.
that's really it. Like I can't even control my own body. If I get cancer, I didn't want cancer. It just happened to me.
Right.
I can control what I do about it. I can control how I feel about that. But
Attitude.
that's about it.
Right.
And the second was recognizing that when I got angry about something, it wasn't the person or the thing that made me angry, but my thinking about it that made me angry.
Right.
So I was causing my own anger.
Yeah.
And that is so hard when you tell people that, like, this person, they did this thing to me and they made me so angry. I'm like, they didn't make you angry. They're like, yes, they did. And I'm like, no, you thought something about that situation. You thought something about that person. And those thoughts are the things that caused your anger. I'm like, if you didn't know that so and so had done that thing, would you have gotten angry about it?
Right.
No. Then so it wasn't the actual thing they did that made you angry. It was that you found out about it or that you experienced it. And it was your thinking around it that made you feel angry.
Right. Yeah. I've lived my life since 2001 by this mantra I heard. The mantra is everything in my life I create, promote, or allow. Total responsibility. When you start to own that, all of a sudden you stop being a victim around what's being done to you because
Yeah.
it's never been done to you. It just happened.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah,
Like when, for example, back in April, I was trying to get this one apartment, and this guy represented himself as a broker, and I paid him some money. We were supposed to meet up and get the keys, and he disappeared on me. And I was frustrated, and I was just like, oh man. And I'm like, I didn't listen to my gut instincts on this. I knew that it just felt funny, and that was okay. And rather than being angry with him for part of the day, I was worried. I was like, okay, I'm not hearing from him. And so my first thought was he in a car accident? Is it that he's not able to get back to me? And so I contacted some mutual friends, and she was like, let me dig around. And she was like, I am so sorry. I just found out from talking to a bunch of other people that he's done this to plenty of other people. And here, look at this website. And somebody posted a website saying, hey, this guy is a thief. Make sure you stay away from him. And it was like, oh man. And rather than being angry and upset about it, it was like, okay, if I'm going to be a stoic, I have to live that way. And I have to just be like, okay, this is what happened. It's like Epictetus talks about when the thief steals his lamp, it just meant the thief was willing to stay up later than he was.
that's awesome. Yeah, I was talking to some friends the other day and they asked me why I did something for so long. I said, I just wanted to see it a certain way for a while. And then I decided, okay, I need to look at reality now. And no one really took advantage of me. I allowed myself to not make a decision, to do other things. And then when I decided, you know what, let's look at what's really in front of us rather than going against my gut, which I've done before. And that's what I tell people, don't go get your gut. It sees clearly when you don't sometimes.
It shouldn't be your map per se, but it should definitely be
Yeah,
your compass. It should be the
absolutely.
thing saying the
Yeah.
direction you're heading in isn't something that seems right.
Yeah.
So then you go back to the map and go, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
there's a dragon right there. I need to stay away from that one. But
Right.
yeah, I think that it's an early warning system. I've found that even in situations where I might have been wrong about it, I was also at least partially right. There was usually
Yeah.
something funny going on where it may not be the whole thing is bad, but there's definitely some fishy things in there that I need to pay attention to. And in this case, I didn't do a very good job of doing that.
Let's shift over to your coaching now. And I know with your view of Stoicism and the philosophy, I'm imagining that you use that consistently throughout your coaching. Are you specializing in any certain areas? Because I've specialized in an area of very difficult conversations, helping people have breakthroughs in relationships around saying what they need to say, completing relationships, all of that work, saying the hard thing. Are you specializing in anything or is it more general? Tell us a little about your coaching programs right now, what you're looking to do in the future.
Yeah, that's some of what I'm honing in on. And I was even thinking about that before our conversation because my original focus was to focus on leadership, which because I was CTO, because I was in tech, I think that's definitely something I will continue as well. I'm actually working on creating another podcast and doing the leadership stuff about that with a friend of mine who runs a software company and a co-working space in Southern Oregon. And he met me through my podcast, and we just gelled immediately. Like we got on a Zoom call. It was 5 o'clock. And then by the time we were done, it's 11:30. My wife is calling me. I need to go.
One of
Because
those.
the
And it
conversation
seemed like 10 minutes probably.
Yeah, the conversation just flowed. And so we've been wanting to work on something for years, and he's been able to automate a lot of the stuff in his business and was looking for something new. And I said, I'm working on this leadership coaching. I think that we can create a really good team on this because you have the processes and the other things in place of how to run a company well, because he's run his company very stoically. It's a very open environment, lots of radical candor and things like that that they very much practice, a lot of good processes in place. And I come from it on the individual side of working with the individual on basically getting over their shit, because that's something that I've had to do. Because my background with the Mormon church being very restrictive, my dad was fairly abusive growing up. Not all the time, but it was like living with an alcoholic at times, even though he didn't drink at all, but his behavior was very erratic like that sometimes. Mostly some of his own demons he was fighting, and just I didn't find out about it until I was in my 20s. And it was just like, whoa, okay, I can have some empathy for that, but it still doesn't excuse the way you treated us growing up.
Right.
And so I've had to work through a lot of trauma for that. But through that experience, I've learned how to get to a point of just being very comfortable and very having just a strong sense of balance in my life and equanimity. And the Stoics use that term a lot. And basically, it just means being in equilibrium, that you don't feel overwhelmed by your emotions. You have a natural tranquility that kind of follows you around. It's like you see the Zen masters, what somebody would consider a Zen master. And I wouldn't say that I'm at that level, but I definitely understand a lot more internally some of the old Zen koans that I used to hear, and I'd just be like, that doesn't make any sense. And now it's, oh, okay, I get what they're talking about now.
Yeah, you've gotten to that place where you can start to understand the deeper conversation.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting as I've grown, I just find you peel the onion back and what you think you understand now, years later, you understand it at a different depth. And the depth really shifts everything when you pull that other piece of that layer of the onion out. Really.
Yeah. And so I think I'm still trying to define exactly what it is that I want to help people do. I've got all of these tools now. It's what's going to be the most effective, what's going to be the most useful for somebody. And I think everybody's going to be a bit different, but I think learning to cultivate a mindset of, as the Stoics will call it, living according to virtue.
Mhm.
And I know that some people think that sounds very Victorian. Living according to virtue. Virtue's kind of been over the years meant sexual purity. And that has absolutely nothing to do with what virtue is.
Right.
Virtue is about, do you live with wisdom? Do you practice courage? How do you treat other people? Again, justice. And are you practicing self discipline? And if you can't master those four things, then your life is going to be out of balance somehow.
Yeah.
Because if you're doing dumb things because you're not being wise, you won't be very good at what you do. If you're being a coward or you're being foolhardy, then you're not living smartly courageous and you're not taking risks in your life that you need to help you grow and to become a better person. If you're
Yeah.
treating other people poorly, then you're not doing good to society. And the Stoics were very big on getting out there and doing things for the community and for the public good. And then obviously self-discipline is the thing that wraps all that together, and that's what helps you actually move forward in your life.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was in a group of coaches the other day talking, and someone mentioned this, and I really had never thought of this. You're happiest in life when you're most disciplined. And I thought about that. I was like, wow, that really resonated. I'd never heard that before. But there's a real correlation between the discipline you have in life and happiness. And I look back to my life, I was like, yeah, it really rang true for me. So
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
something
very.
I hadn't looked at.
Oh, I
Interesting,
can.
Eric. I had no idea we were going to go here today, but that's what I like about the organic, following it wherever it shows. We will post all of your information. I would like you to just tell our listeners how they can get a hold of you if they're interested in learning more about your coaching and maybe the Stoic philosophy, maybe catch your podcast. Just share with us a little how to get a hold of you, what you're looking for. I want to be able for people to be able to find you.
Okay. My website is pretty easy. It's stoic.coffee. I it's easy domain name. I started out my podcast originally and called it Stoic Meditations, and then there was a competing one called Stoic Meditations that was being done by an Italian philosophy professor. And so I was like, Massimo is probably a little bit more legit than I am, so I don't want to compete with him. And I was looking at for website names. I'd done maybe like 15, 20 episodes. And then so I was looking to build a website. And so I was like, Stoic dot and just see what it would give me. And I saw coffee and I was like, that's a great name. I like that. And then I was like, Stoic Coffee Break. Yes. Okay. There we go. And so I created the podcast just based upon finding that. And so that's been my guiding theme, if you will, or the kind of my shtick with that. But it works out really well and it's very memorable for people. So stoic.coffee, you can find me on all the social medias, either at stoic.coffee or stoic coffee, all one word. I used to have Stoic Coffee on Instagram, and then for whatever reason, they locked me out and I couldn't get it. I went with stoic.coffee, but everything else is pretty much Stoic Coffee. And yeah, so the type of coaching that I'd like to do is If people want some one-on-one coaching, that's fine. I'm going to be working on some masterminds. I'm still putting some programs together. My part of our focus, at least on the other podcast, which we'll be announcing in a couple of weeks, will definitely be on leadership. And that's our big push on that one. This one, I think, is more for me personally, is I'll be working on people with their individual things, probably mindset, really digging deep and working through some of the garbage. So when we were talking before this and we didn't get to it at all, that pivotal point for me, which launched me over in this direction, was back in 2022. My ex-partner and I were on a camping festival trip and got into just a huge fight. So it was something she had done, which was very hurtful. And I was raging. I was furious and we fought terribly about it, fought on the way home. I took a few weeks and I really just sat down. I'm like, why was I so angry at that? Why was I so out of control? And I realized that my self-esteem was wrapped up in what I thought she thought about me. I was like, why do I need that? Why is there this hold? And I realized that it was because I didn't feel like I was a very good person. So I was like, okay, why don't I feel like I'm a very good person? And I really dug into it. And I was like, what is it that's so bad about me? And so I sat down and I wrote a list. I wrote down all the things that I didn't like about myself or that I thought were bad about myself. And in doing so, it was a big, giant revelation. I was just like, that's it. That's what's so bad about me. And there wasn't anything on there that my friends don't have on their list of things that they struggle with or things that they don't like. And I'm like, and I still love my friends and I care for them deeply. So I was like, okay, I don't have to like all of these things, but I can at least accept all of these things about me. And in doing that, practicing that acceptance, it just shifted my life in a very dramatic way. And so when I'm working with people, that's one of the things I do. I'm like, hey, we got to sit down and you got to face your shit because most of it's shadows. Most of it's just the monster in the closet that as soon as you open it up, you realize it was just shadows coming across and there's no monster in there because most people are not that horrible.
Yeah. There's a great book I read years ago by Debbie Ford. She's passed now, but it was called The Dark Side of Light Chasers. And it was all about shadow work early on in probably 99 or so. I know exactly what you're talking about. And it is freeing when you accept it and you can actually say, hey, this is me. And
yeah,
when you accept it, you have power over it. It stops having power over you.
Yeah, because you've taken responsibility for it. And so that sometimes in this situation, I can be a jerk. I can be a little bit mouthy about this, or I'm really touchy about these things. But if you own that, then you know that. And when your friend is teasing you about something that you're sensitive about, you can be like, hey, I know you're just having fun, but that's a touchy thing for me. And I'm just telling you, this is who I am. And your friend can be like, oh, okay. But until you accept that, if you're just like, no, I'm fine, I'm just perfect. But our egos don't like to look at those dark things about us because then it makes us feel out of balance because we have this image of our idealized self. And now we're looking at this unidealized version of ourselves. And reconciling those two is challenging. But it's challenging, but it's not. Because I've done this exercise with friends. So I'm just like, okay, tell me something you don't like about yourself. And I go down with them and they'll go get through about 5 or 6 things. And I'll be like, okay, can you at least just accept that's a part of you? And then they stop and they're like, yeah. And I said, and if that's hard for you to accept, can you just think about it? If your friend came to you and told you those 5 things, could you accept those things about them? Yeah. I'm like, then do the same for yourself. Then they're just like, that's it? That's self-acceptance? And I'm like, yeah, it's really that easy, but it's that hard at the same time.
It's challenging and it's empowering.
Yeah.
The moment you do it, it's a challenge to be able to do that. And it can be done. But when you do, there's a freedom and empowerment on the back end because then you get to make choice. Until then, I consider you're in reaction.
Yeah.
And when you're in reaction, you're not choosing. It's a reflex. Yeah.
Yep. And the Stoics talk about all the time is that you got to control those reactions and you got to slow them down so that you can respond rather than react.
Exactly. Rather than allow people to push your buttons. So
yeah.
Eric, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for being on the show. And we'll definitely be in touch and possibly do another one, because this went a little longer than my typical ones, but I just found it really comfortable and fun talking. Everyone, I want to say thank you for listening to another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. If you'll like and subscribe, that would be great. I hope to see you soon. And with that, I'm Greg Stevens. I'll see you next time on A Shot of Inspiration. Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks for listening to this episode of A Shot of Inspiration. If you like this or any of our other episodes, make sure you rate it and share it with a friend. This is Greg Stevens, and we look forward to being with you next time. Until then, be bold, be courageous, and respectfully speak your truth.